Not too long ago, somebody who will remain anonymous tweeted a picture of these two cards. They were complaining that the wording on them is too confusing. Specifically the fact that Reynar's costs 0 to foretell and Ethereal Valkyrie's foretell cost are referring to different things. Now, I'm going to explain what's going on here, but I'm also going to explain why. The key to this whole thing is that when someone says a card is confusing, they are correct by definition. It doesn't matter whether you already understand the technical difference here or not. If someone says they don't, there's absolutely nothing to be gained from saying, well, I understand it. However, that's not the same thing as saying the cards are badly written, that the fault lies with the people who put this text there. And that was the implication of this tweet and what drove me to make a video about it. I don't want to pretend that the Delta team, the people who write and edit the cards for functionality, always get everything right. In the very same set, we have Alrund, who should say revealed this way, but they missed the text off. It happens. But the case of foretell is not an error. It's written exactly the way it needs to be. Let's explain what's happening with these cards. Both are referring to the new foretell ability, which allows us to exile a card for 2 generic mana and then cast it for its foretell cost in a future turn. It's a funny kind of ability that looks confusing at first glance, then seems really straightforward, and then looks confusing again when you delve deeper. Timing restrictions and priority, as well as memory issues, are all bundled into foretell, which makes it one of the more complex mechanics we've had in a while. The foretell ability is split into 2 halves. There's the initial exiling of the card, the foretelling, and then the casting later. Foretelling is what's called a special action, which means it doesn't use the stack. Another common special action is playing a land. What's tripping people up here is that both halves of the ability involve paying mana, and the action of foretelling a card looks quite a lot like casting a card. It gets even stranger when you compare the ability with its closest relative, Morph. There, the first half of the ability is the casting of a card face down, while the second half is a special action to reveal it. So we have a 2-part ability, and 2 cards to each effect a different half. Reynar's cost refers to the first half, the special action of paying 2 and exiling a card. The Ethereal Valkyrie refers to the second half, while incidentally bypassing the first half altogether. Now, in the text of the tweet that kicked this whole thing off, the tweeter said that the, quote, foretell cost on Reynar and Valkyrie refers to 2 different things. That's true, but they presented the words foretell cost in quote marks, implying that that text appears on both cards. As you can see, it doesn't. Reynar doesn't say foretell cost for this exact reason. What we actually have here is 2 cards referring to 2 different things using 2 different phrases. Big whoop, right? The tweeter later admits that the 2 phrases are different and says that the point is that the phrasing is clunky and confusing. Again, if someone says something is confusing, then they're right. And it's true that these 2 abilities, while not using the same wording, do look similar on a first read. So why are they like this? Well, the short answer is because they have to be. The second half, the foretell cost, is an alternative casting cost, like a flashback card or force of will. It essentially means, in some situations you can use this cost instead of the one written at the top of the card. Morph is actually an alternative cost, and in all these cases you are casting the card. Keywords that represent alternative costs have a set way of referring to them. You'll see that Past in Flames refers to the flashback cost, Latchkey Fairy refers to its prowl cost, and so on. So Ethereal Valkyrie, in order to do what it wants to do, has to refer to the foretell cost as the foretell cost. I would actually argue that since this card is doing the foretelling for you, there's no ambiguity as to what it's referring to. So the problem, if there is one, is Reynar. The first card you foretell each turn costs 0 to foretell. You could argue, if you didn't know, that this lets you cast 1 spell from exile for free if it was foretold. I could see that. And so could Wizards, since it's the very first ruling on the card clarifying what it means. This is not a small point. If there's ever a hint of ambiguity, the ruling is there to clarify. But I do think that rulings shouldn't be necessary to understand a card, so maybe there's a way to make this more understandable. How about the first card you exile with foretell from your hand face down costs 0 to exile from your hand face down? Not exactly poetry. But it is functional. Kind of. It's confusing in a different way. You exile cards from your hand for any number of reasons, most of which don't cost anything. But if someone hits you with Keru Mind Eater and you exile Doomscar Oracle, can you cast it? Can your opponent? Can your opponent pay for it with the foretell cost? In the actual wording, there are rules to avoid all of this. It specifies that cards that you foretell are the only cards that can be cast with their foretell cost. So maybe we can do better with Reynar. How about... Well, no, I don't think I can do better. I actually tried to think of another example for this video, but the point is that this is the correct way to write this text. Our friend the tweeter, who I swear I'm not trying to pile on here, but they suggested that we call the first half the foretell cost and then the part from exile the foretold cost. Now we know that we can't do that because alternative costs have a precedent to follow, but quite apart from that, that's not better. Like, that's exactly as confusing as the actual wording, it just also happens to be not correct. For me, here's what it all comes down to. If I'm judging an event and someone asks me to explain why these two abilities are different, I'm not going to show them this whole video. I'm just going to point out that Reynar's ability never asks you to cast anything. The Valkyrie does, and we know what casting a spell looks like. You put it on the stack, it resolves, all that jazz. Reynar foretells a card, Valkyrie casts it. And if this causes an argument at your table, now you know what you can say. Is it a little confusing? Yes. Could it be clearer? No.